Hi, and welcome to another episode of Real Estate with Howard Drukarsh. For those who don't know me, I'm one of the co-founders, along with Arthur Bartram and Ron Petticord, of the largest independent real estate brokerage in Canada with over 5,400 agents. I've also been on the board of directors of the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board, the board of directors of the Real Estate Council of Ontario. I sit on the board of the company I co-founded, and my guest reminded me I was also on the advisory council of Habitat for Humanity. So that gives you a bit of a hint of who our guest is today. If you're interested in finding out more about me, the first episode on our podcast intro is about my journey, my ups and downs, and how I ended up here. This is not your typical real estate podcast. We'll be discussing with our guests, which will be agents, brokers, salespeople, developers, builders, people who market pre-construction, finance people, lawyers, media people, and people around the real estate business, like my guest today, and people not connected who just happen to be fascinating guests. All of our guests have had the same situation. They've had to overcome setbacks, roadblocks, failures, rejection, but they kept the trajectory, which would be, I want to be successful, and they kept pushing forward. So all of our guests make for very fascinating people. My own story is for 20 years, I was a real estate agent before starting this company that I was a co-founder. And my role there, whether I was the manager, which I did as we grew, or broker of record and president, which I also did, for the time I was active in the company, I hired over 1,000 people. And some people were new to the business. Some people were transferring. The new people, it was kind of easy after a while to figure out which would be successful. There was a spark and enthusiasm, and I kind of thought to myself, I'd hire them if I needed an agent. And the people transferring from other brokerages was the most flattering thing, because these are people coming from brands that were more well-known than us, longer in the business than us, but they joined us because of better value. So that's our background. Now, for today, our guest is Ene Underwood, and I've known Ene for many years. She has a fascinating background. I'm going to just read you about Ene. She joined Habitat GTA in the spring of 2013. She has a career in both private and public sectors. She was a consultant at McKinsey Company, working with national and global businesses on strategy and organizational transformation. Her private sector career was close to 2 decades in leadership positions for some of Canada's leading hospitals, 3-year role as the chair of Ontario Government Commission examining child welfare. She holds an Honours B.A. from Waterloo, an MBA from Ivey. She lives in Toronto and has a close connection to her farming roots in southwestern Ontario. So, Ene, welcome to our podcast. Nice to see you again.
Hey, it's great to be here. I forgot my introduction was that long.
Well, it's long, but it's impressive. So I didn't want to miss anything. So we go back quite a bit. And why don't I turn it over to you to talk about the relationship between the company I co-founded and Habitat for Humanity?
Yeah, and I know we're going to talk a bit about Habitat as well. And I mean, Habitat only works if people will come and partner with us. And so when I started a Habitat more than 8 years ago, one of the first corporate partners that I came to learn about was your organization, Right at Home Realty, and your relationship with us predated me by a number of years. And you have stuck with us all these years because, I think the notion of Right at Home Realty is all about, helping individuals and families have a home that works for them and build some wealth while they're at it. And that's the same as we do at Habitat. And I love the way that Right at Home has made the connection, because you came up with this formula long before I was involved of encouraging your agents to donate, a small amount of their sales transactions to Habitat to enable us to do what we do. And so I think now, Howard, we are up to, as of this year, I think in excess of $800,000 that Right at Home Realty and its agents have contributed to the work of Habitat for Humanity across the GTA. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful partnership. And I know many of your agents have also been out in our build sites helping us actually build these homes as well.
And it's interesting because people we made it so easy for them to contribute. They just had to indicate how much per sale they wanted to contribute, and then it was automatically done. Then when you offered the builds, then people really got involved, because the builds are basically a fun way to feel that you're helping in more than a financial way. I mean, I remember I went out to a build, put on the boots, put on the hat, hit a couple of nails. They didn't go in right. So I'm not the build guy. But the enthusiasm of everybody there early in the morning, it tells me everybody really liked being involved. And I think we like being a partner with Habitat. It's just such a great organization. So, and having you here was fun, because I know how busy you are. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to really tell people who I think are perhaps not initiated in what does Habitat do for its families. I think that would be a really good part of our podcast, for you to explain, how do the families get involved, and what are the benefits once they do.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. And it's interesting with that name, Habitat for Humanity, because we're a really well-known brand, where the brand is valued at $15.6 billion. It's being ranked ahead of Johnson & Johnson and Ritz-Carlton and a number of other companies, just in terms of, on the Enduring Brand Index. And yet we're well known, but we're not known well. And everyone has that image that you described, of volunteers on our build sites helping build homes for lower income families. But beyond that, there isn't a lot of knowledge of, do we give these homes away, and how does it work? So as I said, when I was connecting the dots with Right at Home Realty, in many respects, people in the real estate industry and Habitat, we're about the same things. So first of all, we're about the fact that, having a home that is yours, that you're proud of, that's at the adequate size for your children, that's in a neighborhood that works for you, is a foundation for all the things that matter. It's a foundation for you to be able to thrive as a family. It's a foundation for your kids to do well in school and have a place to work on projects when they're at home. It's a foundation for you as adults to thrive at work, whether you're working under quarantine from home, or whether you're traveling to an office every day. So it's real common ground. We're all in the real estate business here, but what we also recognize with home is, not only does it create that foundation every day for your life, but when you own that home, it also creates a foundation for financial independence. And, you and I, and I'm sure many, maybe most of people listening to this podcast, are benefiting from the wealth that we've built in our homes, and what that means for us being able to help our kids, with their education, help them with a down payment on their home, plan for a secure retirement, etc. So these are kind of basics that we all embrace, as what we'd all aspire for as Canadians. And yet everyone recognizes that the families in our society who are lower income, especially in centers like the GTA, those kind of privileges are out of reach. And that notion of the having an adequate home, let alone a home that you own, is out of reach because of income. So what Habitat does is, we are working with lower income households who are working, so they're paying rent now, and they're paying rent, but they're almost certainly living in crowded conditions at home, and conditions that may also be unsafe and unhealthy for their family, and they may be paying more than 50% of their income on that crowded, unhealthy home. And so we enable them to be able to not only live in a home that is appropriate for their family, but to own that home, and to take what would have been rent payments, and instead of that being rent that's going to someone else, do what the rest of us do as homeowners, have those rent be a way of building equity. So in that sense, we're giving them the stability of a home today, and the financial independence and the generational mobility that comes from equity and wealth that you can build in a home. And now the other part of the equation is, that's great. That's what we do for homeowners. And the way we make it work for homeowners is with our pretty unique mortgage structure. So at Habitat, and this, Howard, the families themselves, again, because their incomes are low, they'll never have enough money to be able to put aside for a down payment. And so the Habitat model is a partnership, and it says, in exchange for you as a family partnering with us by providing 500 hours of your time volunteering, you will not have to pay a cash down payment. And then when you become a Habitat homeowner, your mortgage payments will be structured so that the amount you are paying will be calibrated based on your family income. And we use 32% as the threshold. So 32% equals principal and interest plus condo fees plus property taxes and home insurance. That will never exceed 32%. So, and so it means that these homeowners are getting a mortgage. Their first mortgage is probably a $200,000 mortgage because that reflects their incomes. And then we, Habitat, hold a second mortgage that is the difference between the full value of the property and the homeowner's first mortgage. And that second mortgage stays silent and zero interest until such time as the homeowners have paid off their first mortgage. So that's a lot of words to say. That's how we're making it work for homeowners. Then how do we make it work as Habitat? Because these homes obviously cost more than $200,000 for us to build, even with outstanding volunteers like yourself. And so that is where, number one, the mortgages come in, because as we receive those mortgage payments, we are using them to help the next family. But also donations, as you said, like you've done it Right at Home Realty, is a big part of the formula. And so is the work that we do with governments, of working with governments to get concessions around development charges or permits or other things, so that somehow we're amassing the money to put together what we need to build the home and make this kind of transforming a future possible for families.
It's interesting when we talked about the build part, we didn't talk about the other end, the completion part, and how the dedications are done. And I thought that's also something that's so it's so well done and involving not just the families, but also the volunteers to show up and to see, because when you come out to a build, it's the early stages. Generally you're not finishing the house, but then you're invited to see the finished product. There's a key ceremony that goes to the family. There's a lot of cheering, and if you'd like, you can do your cheer at some point in the podcast. But it's the enthusiasm that I always found fascinating, that people are there with such genuine enthusiasm for the charity and for how Habitat works. The other thing, go ahead.
And sorry, I was going to say, and I'm glad you mentioned the dedications, because they're so symbolic. Because the Habitat model is this notion of we mobilize communities to help lower income families have this possibility. And so, as you said, at the dedications, we invite, donors that have given us lots of money, donors who have given us little money, volunteers who have given of their time, governments who have been part of it. And then, as you said, the families are there, and we're all together as a partnership, sharing a moment. And you've been at many dedications, and you've heard me say, make no mistake, the hardest working partners here are the families. Because they've been continuing to do work, usually at a couple jobs, and find 500 hours to, do their sweat equity. And there they are with their kids, celebrating this wonderful moment where the next chapter of not just their lives, but their children and their children's life begins, through those dedications.
The quality of the supporters was something that I truly was amazed at when I sat on the Chair's Advisory Council. And a couple of those relationships have extended since then. Paul Galini, who was at Empire at the time, I've connected and stayed in touch with Paul. Martin Blake put me in touch with Dominic Tompa, and Dominic's the Vice President of Sales for Daniels, which is, as you can explain, a real big supporter of Habitat as well. But the other people around the table, do you remember some of the other incredible supporters that were at that table back then?
Yeah, well, at the Chair's Advisory Council, it was chaired by Ed Clark, who at the time was CEO of TD Bank. And, Ed has been a wonderful community philanthropist. And he has been on Team Habitat since 2004, I think. We have, another family that works a lot with us. I think you met Susan Hawkins on around the table,
Right.
and she and her husband run a very successful tool and die business in multiple countries. We had someone, I think, from the Anglican diocese around the table at that time, and I'm forgetting some of the other players. And of course, some change over time. So we have some players who come on board for 5 years or so, and then others, like yourself, like the Ed Clark relationship, the Hawkins family relationship, the TD relationship. Some that are quite enduring.
I think it was Michael McMillan who was also on there from.
Yes, yep. In the early days, Mike McMillan was also involved. Yep, at that time with Alliance Atlantis, and I forget what he's doing now.
He went into. I guess it's been years since I followed him, but he went into some sort of a think tank. Very, something very. Interesting, for lack of a better word.
And I think like you made reference to how you made connections for your professional life, right? And that's what I think I know you will get into talking a bit about my story. So many of my professional moves have come from people I've met in my volunteer life. Mm-hmm. And so what I love about Habitat is seeing because we mobilize around 9,000 volunteers a year, and those volunteers meet other people and have other experiences that opens doors and possibilities and different ways of thinking for them. So it's people think of the home and that the build kind of experience with Habitat is kind of the main part of Habitat, and it is the main event. But there's so much more beyond that build itself in terms of the impact of Habitat for Humanity.
Well, I'm going to kind of lead you along to the things that I found so impressive. Let's talk about the restores as well, and how successful they are and how they play into the economic picture for Habitat. It's a fascinating story.
Yeah, thank you. And the restores, Habitat itself is a social enterprise, meaning we don't get any operating funds from government. We are using business thinking to do good. The mortgage model, which I've talked about, is obviously an example of that. But as you said, we're so proud of our restore. So a restore is a retail outlet. Anyone can shop there in person someday when we're out of lockdown, or online. And we sell, all the product is donated from both consumers, so from private homes, as well as from businesses. And we sell home appliances, home furniture, and home renovation products. You can get fantastic things in the restore. And because all the product is donated, obviously, we pay in leases, we pay for staff, we have lots of volunteers in the restore. And so the proceeds that the restores generate enable us to, pay for most of our administrative and fundraising overhead, as well as create those wonderful experiences for, me. I've got all kinds of great stuff in my house that I couldn't have afforded to buy it elsewhere, but I've got these wonderful things from my restore, but the other side of the coin, especially now with the COVID lockdown, the proceeds from our restore online, and you can go there at just habitatrestore.ca. But the proceeds from our restore online, together with the government subsidies, are what enabling us now to keep all of our staff working on fundraising, on kind of mobilizing volunteers, on continuing with the development for our future build projects. So the restores are a vital part of the Habitat formula.
And that's why I wanted to bring.
And along the way, and there's an environmental part, of course. Like they're keeping, hundreds of tons of materials out of landfill sites and enabling us to continue, reusing, wonderful kind of home furniture and home products.
So here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to move on to Ene Underwood, the person. But I'm hopeful that people who see this podcast will be interested in finding out more, either about volunteering or perhaps contributing. So why don't you tell us the best way to get involved with Habitat, who to contact?
Yeah, so the absolute best way to get involved, like so many other things, go to our website. So it's habitatgta.ca, and you'll find it's pretty easy to navigate there if you're interested in volunteering, if you are interested in donating, if you know a family, maybe the caregiver for your aging parents or, someone in your child's daycare, and you're wondering, I wonder if they've been thinking about home ownership. It's fairly easy for families to also get started and to get oriented from our build site. And of course, you'll quickly find where you can find your way to restore. And I think people will be very impressed by both the quality of product as well as the ease of the online shopping experience with our resource.
Okay. So,
and we deliver, by the way.
Oh.
So we will pick up from your door and we will deliver to your door.
Listen, Ian, I think people can see why you're such an excellent CEO. I mean, you're so passionate about Habitat. You always have been. And it's a delight to have you on our podcast. So let's talk a bit about Ian, okay? I always find one of the best things that explains someone's growth is their background. So what about your background in terms of family, father, mother? What sort of influence did they have on you?
Thank you for asking. And you're right. These dots always connect to what we do today. Mm-hmm. So when you did the intro of me, your last line made reference to my agricultural roots. So I am privileged to be one of the few Canadians now who comes from an agricultural background, now a 4-generation farm in southwestern Ontario, which continues today under the leadership of my 2 brothers and 2 nephews. And so I was the youngest of 5 children. Growing up on this beef, poultry, and cash crop farm in southwestern Ontario. And there's pretty early on actually a story that, connects to my passion today about Habitat. And that is, when I was, little, the farm then was kind of that stereotypical 2 parents, mom and dad, with more kids than they planned on having, trying to hold the farm together. And one of my earliest memories is being, I thought it was 4 years old. I've learned now I was 3 years old, in my mother's arms on a warm summer evening, watching our chicken barn burn. Mm. And my memories of that, I mean, we as adults hear that and have that sense of dread and, fear and loss. My memories of it are I just remember thinking it was pretty. And the neighbors had come and the fire trucks were there and I was in my mother's arms safe. And I just thought it was pretty and exciting and had no concept of the devastation that fire represented for my parents. Mm-hmm. And the next memory that I have relating to that barn is 8 months or so later. And it was a barn dance. So with someone calling a square dance and little kids running, me included, running wild everywhere. And, all the mothers who had brought sandwiches and lunches. And so I remember all the fun of it. And this is, by the way, the barn before the chickens kind of moved back, arrived again. But I remember the very quiet and tearful moment when my parents stood up and very emotionally thanked their friends and extended family and neighbors for supporting them and helping them rebuild. And, I was 4 years old when they stood up and did that speech. And you talked at the beginning about dedications, right? At our dedications, you see the kids there, and sometimes their families speak about how much it means to them. Mm-hmm. And so, when I'm at those dedications, I look at those little kids and I think, I had a moment in my life where I didn't really understand what was going on, but I knew it was important. Mm-hmm. And so in the years that followed that, I watched my parents continue to, give back to the community too. And so the notion of, giving back, and for me, I was always, for whatever reason, kind of wired around, I always knew I wanted to do something that was kind of part of doing good. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of my roots. And again, I'll just, go back to that barn burning story, because what's so powerful about it is, as I said, I learned in later years as I got older that was a seminal moment for my family where my parents almost lost the farm. Mm-hmm. And it was the combination of their perseverance, their hard work, and people saying, how can we help? that enabled them to, keep the farm. And that farm went on to raise, five now very, successful contributing adults. And as I said, it exists. My parents have died, but it exists today, led by my two brothers. It feeds thousands of families across Canada and in the Pacific Rim. And that's, that's the Habitat story. You never know who needs help and when they need help. And that was, pretty formative, for me growing up.
Well, that really explains, what I didn't know about you. And, you've answered almost all the questions I would have asked you in just explaining your life. There is one question I do like to ask, because I remember when it was asked of me, it was one of those aha moments. So here it is. It's actually the only question I'll be asking you is, Ian, if you could go back and tell your 20-year-old self something, what would that be?
I think so. I'm going to offer you a few answers.
Sure.
So I'll give you three. One is patience, grasshopper.
Okay.
Which is a saying a very good friend of mine who came into my life probably when I was about 26, has said to me very often. The notion of, things will come together eventually if you're following your heart and if you are continuing to persevere. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I don't know what words I would have used to say it, but you and I talked about it a bit at the outside of our conversation. I would have said keep volunteering and keep giving, because it always comes back to you. So again, and I don't know if we're going to chat a bit about the various kind of stops along the way of my career, but there's only, I think, one job of a 5 kind of career story that came to me other than through networks that happen through volunteering. So I've just been amazed at how I meet someone through volunteering and then it opens a door that I didn't even know I was looking for at some point in the future. So, that notion of, networking and putting yourself out there would certainly have been part of it. And, I guess the third one, Howard, would be understand your privilege. And so I say that thinking of, now where we are today in 2021. And I think for so many of us, like you and I are both white, we've grown up with a level of privilege that we are only now starting to understand. And so in my world at Habitat for Humanity, I see that every day, but I would say in particular in these last, 18 months, my awareness of privilege and the opportunity that privilege gives me to open doors and create possibilities for others is something that I understand now in a way that I did not as a 20-year-old.
All right. Well, listen, Ian, your analytical style, I'm sure, is what got you all the successes along the way. Before I let you go, I have another question I wanted to ask because I know this is one that I'm sure you're still passionate about. Mountain biking. Are you still a mountain biker?
I am indeed.
Okay.
We all have things that fuel us and bring us joy. And so, and I see I've got a mountain bike over my shoulder here in this backdrop.
Oh.
Yes. Yeah, we all have things that fuel us and give us joy and a happy place that can kind of enable us to kind of be re-energized. Mm-hmm. So for me, as improbable as it seems for a woman in her now mid and approaching later 50s, I remain super passionate about mountain biking. Last summer with the COVID limitations, I turned that into bike packing. Which is kind of mountain biking with your tent and everything else you need to be fully self-supported. So disappearing on trails and back roads, etc. So I biked 2,500 kilometers in various corners of Ontario with my bike and my tent and everything else last summer as a way of kind of renewing and re-energizing for what was obviously a super, super challenging year.
Wow, good for you. Listen, I'd love to have you back. I know you're busy, and I appreciate the time. I certainly appreciate you explaining Habitat for Humanity, because I think that the tremendous success of that organization and the contribution to so many people, I just think it was, or perhaps hasn't been, as well explained as how you did it today. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to wish you all the best. And would you come back again on another podcast?
I'd be thrilled to come back. And Howard, thanks for providing the opportunity to explain it. We love what we do at Habitat for Humanity. And this last year, with all of us hunkered down in our homes, I think has just so brought home home is really important. Mm-hmm. And there's so many people in our region that don't have that possibility. And so we're working hard to create possibilities for more families.
Okay. Ian, a real pleasure to see you again. It's been a long time. I'm so glad that the donation from the company is coming up, because I know it's going to be helpful for you and the organization. And we will have you back again.
Fantastic. Thanks, Howard.
Thanks. Stay safe. Thanks a lot, Ian. Bye. We'd like to thank Ene Underwood of Habitat for Humanity, GTA, and we'd like to thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed our podcast, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell your friends about us as well. You can find our podcast on all the major podcast networks and on our channel on YouTube. If you're interested in reaching us, you can do that a couple of ways. One is by email, and you can email us at info@rewithhd.com, or you can reach us directly on our website, which is rewithhd.com. Thanks for joining us, and stay safe.